Well, ever since I started putting videos up on YouTube, the most commonly requested video I've had is how I became an atheist. And that's really a tough question, because there's not a specific time or moment when someone becomes an atheist. It's a process. For me, it took several years. But after many requests, I've decided to go ahead and kind of share my story. I was born into a very religious household. My parents went to church every single week. I was indoctrinated at a very young age into the religion of my parents. We frequently had scripture study at home as well as at church. And I believed it. Completely, wholeheartedly believed everything I was told. I had no reason not to. Throughout junior high school, I was sharing the gospel with friends, inviting people to go to church. Even more so in high school. I dated some girls, invited them to church functions and different things like that. Just trying to share the gospel and share the word. There was one girl I had started dating who was from a different denomination than I was, and she considered my denomination evil. Which is always fun when you've got a couple different versions of Christianity and one considers another one to be evil. Now, in all fairness, the denomination that I was a part of was also very exclusive. We believed other denominations were partially true, but didn't think they had the whole story. They weren't completely true, and therefore, obviously, they weren't going to get the full benefits of the truth from God. Where we believed our denomination, obviously, did possess those full truths. Now, she thought my denomination was evil, and I invited her to church functions so she could experience it for herself. She invited me to go to church with her, and we talked about religion quite a bit, and kind of debated the topic a fair amount while we were dating. She wasn't able to answer most of my questions. When I came up with reasons that I didn't believe in her particular denomination and different things that her pastor had said, which didn't sit well with me, she asked me one time if I'd like to sit down and meet with her pastor. Now, I jumped at the idea because I've never, up to that point, had never spoken with the actual pastor or priest from a denomination other than my own, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to sit down and actually ask questions to someone who has the authority and ideally the knowledge to be able to answer these questions. So, I agreed. She made the arrangements, and about a week later, I went and picked her up, and she gave me directions, and off we drove. The trouble is, she lied. She didn't take me to see her pastor. She took me to see a professional apologist. The apologist, his entire purpose in life was to convert people out of the denomination I happened to be a part of and into her denomination of Christianity. Now, I was a little bit upset that I was, lied to. I was hoping to meet with the pastor and not just some guy who debates for a living, but I figured it was still a good place to get my questions answered. So I sat down and I spoke with the guy for hours. It was about either 2 or 3 hours, where he basically ripped apart everything I'd ever been told in church and in school in some cases, and told me that I was going to go to hell, that my grandparents were in hell, that my parents were going to go to hell, all sorts of fun stories. And I didn't ask a whole lot of questions then because it was more like information overload. He was just giving me so much, and I didn't really know where to go from there. I drove home from that event a little confused, or very confused, and a little shaken. And end up sitting down and basically reading the Bible wholeheartedly and praying about it, and was pretty quick to disprove a lot of the stuff he had said. Was able to, find verses which contradicted, one claim and agreed with me, and I ended up going through and wrote a short apologetic work of my own, a short book. Unfortunately, I no longer have a copy of that, I'm sorry. But wrote a short book basically defending my position and debunking his. I was maybe 17 or 18 years old at the time. I realized at that moment that even though I was able to defeat his arguments, I couldn't do it spur of the moment. It took me days and days to read through and research different topics and find the answers to contradict the different things he had said. I realized I was completely unprepared to debate religion with someone who actually knew more than I did. They knew really what the topic was talking about. So I discovered, just like a regular debate, I needed to kind of learn both sides. I decided the best way to do that wasn't going to be to read atheist books or to read books written by non-believers, but it was going to be to read the Bible without the assumption that it had to be true. I wanted to read it just like I would read any other book that I was trying to determine if it was true. Because I knew, first of all, I couldn't defend the Bible with itself. That's circular logic. That was pretty obvious. I would have to defend the Bible with historical proofs and scientific proofs and have to find things outside that agreed with it. Just saying this book agrees with this book or this chapter agrees with that chapter doesn't prove that either chapter is actually right. So, sat down and started reading. And it was a very new experience. Reading the Bible without the assumption that it must be true was the single greatest thing that turned me into an atheist. It's as I started reading it and I was realizing this doesn't make sense. This book contradicts that book completely. They can't be rectified. This part doesn't add up to that part. These don't make sense. There are too many unanswered questions here. And that was rough. I mean, it was really, really rough. I felt like the world was crashing around me. I felt like the only person in the world who had ever realized this. There wasn't really anybody I could even turn to for questions. My parents were fervent believers. All my friends were fervent believers. When I mentioned any of them that I had doubts or questions, their response was always, well, read the Bible and pray about it. I was already doing that. I was praying every single day, and very, very hard. And it was difficult. It was a hard time of my life. The hardest thing was the fact that I felt so alone. I felt like I was the first person in history to ever have questions about the veracity of the Bible. And the more and more I read, the less and less it could be defended. And I just started realizing that this book, it was bullshit. It was complete and utter bullshit.